In the winter of 1844, a Lakota band of roughly 200 people, hunters, women, children, and 8 elders over 70 winters, made camp in a canyon system near what is now the Black Hills. The buffalo had not come. The traders had not come. The stores from the previous season had run thin. By November, the temperature had dropped to 20 degrees below zero. A child had already died. An elder named Washte Wioshpaye, good band, was still alive, but barely. He could no longer walk. His daughter carried him on her back each morning when the band moved. The question was not whether he would survive the winter. The question was whether the band itself would survive if they tried. This was not a story of heroic individual toughness. This was not a story about the Lakota being naturally suited to cold. This was not luck. What happened in that canyon over the next 4 months was the product of a system, a set of interlocking decisions, priorities, and practices that had been refined over centuries. And it was a system that would later be dismantled, deliberately, by forces that understood exactly what they were destroying. Today, we're going to show you 3 core practices that kept the most vulnerable alive when starvation came to the band: the redistribution of the kill, the protection of the fire, and the choice to move. We'll show you how each one worked in real time, and we'll be honest about the cost, because there were winters when even these practices were not enough, and the band had to make choices that no community should ever have to make. The kill and the law. In late November, after weeks of failed hunts, 2 hunters from the band, a man named Petewaquin and his younger cousin, found tracks. Elk tracks, fresh, leading deeper into the canyon system. The band had maybe 3 weeks of stored meat left, divided among 200 people. That meant each person had access to roughly 1 pound of meat every 2 days, supplemented by whatever could be foraged in winter: bark, roots, dried berries from the previous summer. Petewaquin was 43. His cousin was 19. They hunted alone, as was common for Lakota hunters. They moved through the snow for 2 days. On the 3rd day, they found the elk, a bull, old, moving slowly through a ravine. Petewaquin's bow was made of ash wood, backed with sinew, strung with twisted hide. It took him 4 shots. The elk fell. The kill weighed roughly 450 pounds of usable meat. Here is where the system began. Petewaquin and his cousin did not keep the elk. They did not divide it between their 2 families. They did not sell it to the band. What happened next was encoded in Lakota law, unwritten but absolute. They brought the kill back to the camp. A herald, a man designated by the band council, announced the kill at the center of the camp's circle. The announcement was not a celebration. It was a notification of obligation. Within hours, the meat was distributed according to a precise hierarchy. The hunter and his immediate family received a portion, roughly 1/4 of the kill. The rest was divided among the entire band according to need, not according to rank or wealth. The 8 elders, those who could no longer hunt, trap, or gather, received portions equal to the hunters themselves. The widows received portions equal to the hunters. The families with sick children received extra. The families with no hunters received extra. A man who had killed 5 elk that season received the same portion size as a man who had killed none. This was not charity. This was not generosity in the way those words are understood in English. This was law, and it was enforced. If a hunter tried to keep the meat, if he tried to trade it to another band for personal gain, if he tried to hide it, the consequences were swift. He could be stripped of his weapons. He could be expelled from the camp. In extreme cases, his teepee could be torn down, his horses driven off. The band could not afford to let individual accumulation override collective survival. The reason was mathematical and brutal. If Petewaquin had kept the entire elk for his family of 5, his wife, his 3 children, and his elderly mother, they would have had enough meat for nearly 3 months. But if he did that, the band's food supply would drop by roughly 2%. 2% might not sound like much. But in a band of 200 people facing a winter with no guarantee of another successful hunt, 2% was the difference between starvation and survival. It was the difference between an elder like Washte staying alive and freezing to death in his daughter's arms. So, the elk was divided. Washte received roughly 40 pounds of meat, enough for 30 days at the minimum ration the band had established. He received it not because he was respected, though he was. He received it because the band had decided, long before this winter, that the old would eat. The fire and the rotation. By December, the temperature had dropped further. The band had moved twice, following a river valley where the wind was less severe and where dead wood was more plentiful. The camp now consisted of 23 teepees arranged in a circle, with the opening facing east, toward the rising sun. Inside each teepee, a fire burned. The fire was not just for warmth. It was the center of the structure. 3 poles lashed together at the top, roughly 17 poles total, the base covering an area about 25 feet across. The smoke from the fire rose through an opening at the top, created by adjustable flaps made of hide. The heat from the fire did not radiate evenly. It rose. It escaped through the smoke hole. The temperature at the height of a man's head, sitting near the fire, might reach 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature at the edges of the teepee, where the hide met the ground, might be only 30 degrees. This was where the system of fire management became critical. Inside the teepee of Washte there was a specific arrangement. His daughter, her husband, and their 3 children slept in a circle around the fire, with Washte positioned between the fire and the inner dew cloth, a liner of hide that hung about 5 or 6 feet up the inside of the teepee, creating an insulating air gap between the liner and the outer hide. The position was not random. The fire's heat rose directly toward the smoke hole, but before it reached the hole, it hit the dew cloth. The cloth deflected some of the heat back down, creating a warmer zone at the center of the teepee. Washte slept in that zone. His daughter slept next to him. Her husband slept on the opposite side of the fire, where the cold was more intense. The children rotated. One child slept near the fire, one slept in the middle, one slept at the edge. But the teepee's heat management did not stop there. The band had established a rotation system for firewood. Each family was responsible for maintaining a fire, but the wood was not divided equally. Families with elders, families with infants, families with sick members, they received priority access to the best firewood. The best firewood was dry cottonwood from the previous summer, stored in bundles near the river. It burned hot and long. The worst firewood was green wood, recently cut, which produced more smoke than heat. Washte daughter's family received dry cottonwood. Other families received a mix. The rotation meant that every few days, a family with an elder would trade places with a family with healthy hunters. The hunters could tolerate the colder sleeping position. The elders could not. This was not a system that emerged by accident. Lakota elders had refined this arrangement over centuries. They understood through accumulated observation that the body loses heat faster at the extremities than at the core. They understood that an old person's body generates less internal heat than a young person's body. They understood that the fire's heat rises and that positioning matters. They understood that the rotation system meant no family bore the full cost of heating an elder. The cost was distributed across the entire camp. But here is the part that historians often miss. This system only worked if the band maintained it collectively. If one family decided to keep all the dry firewood for themselves, if another family refused to participate in the rotation, if a third family tried to hoard extra wood, the system collapsed. The elders would freeze. The system depended on enforcement, so the band appointed a firekeeper, a man or woman responsible for monitoring firewood distribution and enforcing the rotation. In this winter, the firekeeper was a woman named Wichashta Wiye, woman strong. She walked through the camp each evening, checking the fires, observing which families had dry wood and which had green. If a family tried to keep extra wood, she would take it and redistribute it. There is no record of her being thanked. There is also no record of her being defied. The system worked because everyone understood the alternative. The move by January, the band had moved 3 times. The canyon system they had chosen offered protection from the wind, but it also meant limited access to game. The hunters had to range farther and farther from the camp to find elk or deer. A hunt that should have taken 3 days was taking 5 or 6. The hunters were burning calories faster than they were replacing them. Ptawaquin had killed nothing since the elk in November. Neither had 3 other hunters in the band. The stores were running down. The mathematical reality was becoming impossible to ignore. At the current consumption rate, the band had enough meat for roughly 6 more weeks. The winter would last at least 10 more weeks. The shortfall was catastrophic. This is where the third system came into play, the decision to move. On a morning in mid-January, the band council met. The council consisted of the 4 oldest men, all in their 60s or older, plus the firekeeper and 2 other respected hunters. The discussion lasted several hours. The question was not whether to move. The question was where. A scout had reported that a buffalo herd had been sighted roughly 40 miles to the south, in a region less protected from the wind, but more open for hunting. Moving 40 miles in winter, with 200 people, including 8 elders and dozens of children, was dangerous. The journey would take 4 days, possibly 5. People would die. That was not speculation. That was historical fact. Every major winter move in Lakota history had claimed lives, but staying meant slower starvation. The council decided to move. What happened next was a choreography of collective action. The band did not simply pack up and walk. The move was organized with military precision. The strongest hunters, including Petawaquin, were assigned to scout the route ahead and identify camping spots. The women and younger men began breaking down the teepees. The teepee poles were lashed together into bundles. The hides were rolled. The stored meat was divided into portable portions. But here is the critical part. The move was designed with the elders in mind. The band created a rotation system for carrying. Washte Wioshpaye could not walk 40 miles. He was 83 years old. His legs had not supported his full weight in months. So he was placed on a travois, a frame made of 2 teepee poles lashed together with hide, pulled by a horse. His daughter walked beside him, but Washte Wioshpaye was not the only elder on a travois. All 8 elders were given the option. 7 accepted. The band had enough horses to pull them. This meant that younger, stronger people had to walk. It meant that some families lost access to horses that could have carried their possessions. But the decision had been made. The elders would be transported. The move took 5 days. 2 children died, one from pneumonia, one from exposure. An adult died from a fall on the 2nd day. The band mourned them. The band also continued moving. This was the brutal mathematics of survival. Some would die so that others could live. When the band reached the buffalo grounds, they found the herd. Within a week, hunters had killed 6 buffalo. The kill was enormous, roughly 2,700 pounds of meat per buffalo. That meant the band had access to roughly 16,000 pounds of meat. At the minimum ration of 1 pound per person per day, that was 80 days of food. The winter had 8 weeks left. They would survive. Washte Wioshpaye lived through that winter. He lived through 3 more winters after that. He died in 1849 at the age of 88, surrounded by his family. His death was not from starvation. It was from pneumonia in the spring when the weather was warming. The cost of the system. But the system had limits, and there were winters when those limits were reached. In the winter of 1856, A different band, roughly the same size, camped in the same region, faced a worse scenario. The buffalo had not come. The elk had not come. A disease had swept through the camp in the fall, killing hunters and weakening others. By December, the stored meat was gone. The band was surviving on roots, bark, and whatever small game the hunters could trap. By February, people were dying. The children died first. Then the elderly. Then the weakest of the adults. The band council faced a choice that historians have documented in Lakota oral tradition, though it is rarely mentioned in English-language histories. In extreme starvation, some bands made the decision to stop feeding the oldest members. The elders would be given water and minimal food, enough to keep them alive, but not enough to sustain them. The meat that would have gone to the elders would go to the younger people, the hunters, the women of childbearing age, the children. The logic was brutal and mathematical. A band of 50 people, with 10 elders, faced starvation. If the band reduced itself to 40 people by allowing the 10 elders to die, the remaining 40 could survive on the same amount of food. This was not murder. This was not abandonment. This was a choice made collectively, often with the elders' consent. In Lakota tradition, an elder who understood they were consuming food needed for the survival of children could choose to stop eating. They could walk away from the camp into the snow. They could refuse water. They could lie down and wait for death. Some did. This is the part of the story that the system of elder care does not tell you. The system worked. It kept elders alive through most winters. But it was not a system of unconditional protection. It was a system of conditional protection, conditional on the band's survival. When the band faced total collapse, the condition was not met. The band that faced starvation in 1856 lost roughly 30% of its population that winter. The elders died at a higher rate than any other age group. This is documented in Lakota oral histories and in the records of fur traders who encountered survivors in the spring. But here is what is also documented. The band survived. The younger people lived. The hunters recovered. The women had children in the spring. The band continued. And the memory of that winter, the knowledge that elders had chosen to die so that children could live, became part of the band's identity. It was not celebrated, it was remembered. It was understood as the ultimate cost of belonging to a community. The system breaks. The system of elder care, with all its sophistication and all its limits, lasted roughly another 2 decades. By the 1870s, it was being systematically dismantled. The buffalo were gone. Hunted to near extinction by hide traders and the U.S. Army, the buffalo population had dropped from roughly 30 million to fewer than 1,000. The Lakota could no longer hunt. They could no longer move. They could no longer organize the rotations and redistributions that had kept the band alive. In 1876, the Lakota were forced onto reservations. The government provided rations, flour, sugar, coffee, occasionally beef, but the rations were calculated at levels below what the band needed. A government agent in 1878 recorded that the rations provided to the Pine Ridge Reservation were sufficient for about 2/3 of the population. The remaining third had to survive on what they could grow, what they could hunt on restricted reservation land, or what they could trade. The elders, who had been sustained by the system of redistribution and collective fire management, suddenly found themselves in a different world. They could not hunt. They could not move to follow the game. They could not participate in the rotations that had kept them warm. They were dependent on the rations, and the rations were insufficient. The death rate among elders on the reservations in the 1880s was catastrophic. The records are incomplete, but the estimates suggest that roughly 40% of Lakota elders died in the first decade of reservation life, not from violence, but from starvation and cold. The system had been broken, and it had been broken deliberately. The U.S. government understood what it was destroying. An official report from the Bureau of Indian Affairs in 1883 noted that the Lakota had a system of collective resource distribution that kept even the weakest members alive. The report recommended accelerating the civilization process, which meant breaking that system, imposing individual land ownership, and forcing the Lakota into a market economy where the weak would not be protected. The present day today, the Lakota continue. The Pine Ridge Reservation has a population of roughly 28,000 enrolled members. The Rosebud Reservation has roughly 10,000. Standing Rock has roughly 8,000. These reservations have the highest rates of poverty in the United States, the lowest life expectancies, and among the highest rates of suicide. But the Lakota have also maintained elements of the old system. The practice of collective decision-making about resource distribution continues, adapted to the modern context. Extended families still pool resources. Elders are still cared for by the community even when resources are scarce. The principle that the vulnerable should be protected, even at cost to the stronger, remains embedded in Lakota culture. In 2024, the Lakota Nation established a new elder care initiative on the Pine Ridge Reservation, designed to provide housing, health care, and food assistance to elders over 65. The program is underfunded. It serves only a fraction of the elders who need it. But it represents a deliberate choice to restore, in modern form, the system that had sustained the band through the winters of the 19th century. The system that kept Washtenaw alive in 1844 is gone. The buffalo are gone, the teepee fires are gone, the rotations and redistributions are gone. But the principle remains. A community's strength is measured not by how well it feeds the strong, but by how well it keeps the weak alive. The Lakota understood this 400 years ago. They understand it still. If you're interested in how communities organize survival under extreme conditions, we've covered the Comanche's system of rapid mobility and the Cheyenne's military society structure. That video is linked below. Subscribe for more stories about how indigenous peoples across North America solved problems that European settlers could not.